Good morning, everybody. That was my first time hitting the gavel. I think I could have put a bit more power into it, but thank you very much for coming down, taking your seats, and we're going to start the session now. So today's session is The Social Gap in Europe, Can We Do Better? My name is Rachel Stewart. I'm a journalist with DW, that's Germany's international broadcaster. I'm really glad to be back here in Strasbourg. It's so nice to see so many of you live here from all across Europe. That you've made it here is such a great achievement in itself, and I hope that you've been having a great exchange of thoughts and ideas over the past day already, and that you've got time today to make the most of all the things going on at this year's I. The whole point of I, essentially, is to hear from you guys and to get your thoughts and ideas and questions. One great place to do that is just outside the hemicycle. You've got the Ideas Hub. There's all sorts of different stations where you can share your ideas with people, network, maybe get some help or advice on developing your ideas, and even get directly in touch with policy or research experts. So make the most of that. And the online platform that's available for you is youthideas.eu, so you can carry on sharing all your thoughts. If you suddenly realise today after the session you had a great idea or a burning question, head to that platform and make sure that you get your voice heard. So first of all, thanks so much that you've come to the early session today. I wasn't sure if we would have so many people in the room. I hope you've all had one coffee or two. I've had just one today, but I'm all ready to talk about social equality all across Europe. There will be time to hear from you in the questions section later, so do keep thinking about what you would like to ask all of our wonderful panelists today. For the online viewers, please do keep posting your questions into the comments section. Let us know where in the world you're joining us from, and of course let us know who your question is directed at. Unfortunately, there's not time for all of the panelists to answer every single question, so please let us know who it's for. So back to today's discussion. When it comes to housing, jobs, living costs, education or integration, how far are we in Europe? How equal are we? There's always, of course, been a lot of disruption and upheaval over the past 12 months, not just in Europe, but across the world. We've seen the war in Ukraine, we've had the global pandemic, and we've also seen a rise in inflation. But what kind of effect do all of these things actually have on social equality? And what kind of a Europe do we even want to see for ourselves and for future generations? Today's panel promises to be a really interesting and a really important topic. I'd just like to remind you of the I-2023 Code of Conduct. This has been put in place to ensure respect, dignity and equality for everybody at this year's event. I look forward to a really interesting and very respectful debate today. So on that note, let's get on with the proceedings. I've let you know already about the questions. Please do keep them coming in the comments section. Ruth, who's just over here, can give us a wave. She's our online moderator for today, and she will keep an eye on all the comments coming in. For those of you in the room, there is live interpretation going on in 24 languages and international sign language. If you look around the room, there's some numbers and symbols that tell you which channel to switch to for each language. So do make the most of that. Right, time to meet our speakers for today. So on the far left, we have Sabina Gjylsheni, who is a researcher for the European Centre of Social Welfare Policy and Research in Austria. Her focus areas include social inclusion, youth integration, and social care. Round of applause for Sabina, please. And immediately on my left, Rosario Ortega works with Plena Inclusión. That's an associative movement that fights for the rights of people with developmental or intellectual disabilities and their families in Spain. Thank you. Welcome. And from the European Parliament, a little bit more used to being in this room than the rest of us, we have Sara Matthieu. She's a Green MEP from Belgium and is a member of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. Thanks for joining us. Today's topic, obviously, is quite a broad one, so to bring us onto the same page straight away, I'd like to ask Sabina, could you perhaps tell us what are some of the main indicators of social equality or social inequality?
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Well, first, I think it's important to define the social equality, and there's many indicators to choose from it, but I picked today indicators that mostly concern or relate to the struggles of young people in Europe. So, to begin with, social equality is a complex concept that encompasses various aspects of fairness, justice, and equal opportunities within a society. So, as I said, there are several indicators commonly used to assess the level of social equality in a given context, but amongst them, I would go with first education. And the reasons for the indicators that I'm picking, I'm going to elaborate on them further, but let's have them as a set first. So education, I would say, employment and economic opportunities, and over here it's important to emphasize the big issue of gender pay gap, gender equality, obviously, health and healthcare access, which is, I would say, a little bit underestimated in the public discussions, but I think it should be more over there when it comes to young people's rights on healthcare access. The social mobility, meaning moving up and down the social ladder because of one's efforts instead of background and circumstances. Political participation and representation. And last but not least, discrimination and social inclusion. And when I say discrimination and social inclusion, of course, I would put the focus on vulnerable groups such as people with disabilities, young people with migrant backgrounds, refugees, LGBTQI community, and many, many more vulnerable groups, which feel free to add on it later on. But yeah, I would say more or less these are the main indicators that we should talk about more, politicians should also talk about more, and research should research a little bit more. Thank you.
So you've covered a lot of ground there already. Could you perhaps say which social policy areas you think are really the most important for young people in Europe today?
Oh, well, okay. You jump right into that. So, I have personally picked three main important ones because it would take us forever and maybe many, many beers to go over all of them. But as a young person in Europe, I can say that the most important social policy areas for young people right now are education, employment, and healthcare, and also what comes in between these three areas. So basically, young people need access to quality education that equips them with skills and needs for the evolving job market. They also require equal opportunities for employment where their talents or qualifications are valued. And they can have a fair chance to succeed, actually, which is seeming to become more and more difficult. And additionally, as I said, affordable and accessible healthcare is crucial. However, if time allows, I would like to tackle all of them a little bit more individually and dwell into it a little bit more. So as for education, there's already a variety of policies and regulations that aim at ensuring equal access to quality education. However, it is still important to mention to maintain the focus on reducing educational disparities between regions, socioeconomic groups, and marginalized communities. Measures such as providing adequate resources to schools in disadvantaged areas, offering scholarships and financial assistance to students from low-income backgrounds, and of course implementing inclusive education practices that help level the playing field and enhance educational outcome. And for that, of course, the starting point should be in investing in early childhood education and then picking it up from there until the higher education. But providing a quality preschool education, also targeted intervention for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and comprehensive support services can also help mitigate the impact of social disadvantages, such as the education of youth with disabilities, for instance, which it is slightly under-talked. I would pass also to my next point, which is employment, but before passing there, I would actually like to stop at the gap between education, and passing to employment and job market. So as a young person who, of course, has struggled finding her place in the job market, I would like to stop for a moment and talk about this transition. It is eventually a critical phase in everyone's life, and this transition is especially amplified for vulnerable groups, as I mentioned. So it is crucial to address the barriers and bias that hinder the transition to employment, such as discrimination, unequal access to resources, and limited opportunities for marginalized groups. A lot of young people's job opportunities get jeopardized. I can name a few of reasons, but I would say national background, physical or mental disabilities, sexual orientation, gender, or their migrant background. And here I come from a personal experience as well. I'm a non-EU national who works in the EU job market, and finding a job as a policy analyst and a researcher, let's say, has not been like a nice walk in the field. So believe me when I say that it has its own struggles, and I think there should be more and more done in that regard to smoothen this transition, because it's eventually crucial in everyone's life. And this, of course, would bring me to employment. We need equal opportunities for employment regardless of gender, race, socioeconomic background. I would also like to stop for a moment and focus on unpaid internships, the almighty unpaid internships. While internships can provide, of course, valuable learning opportunities and practical skills, unpaid internships have been the subject of debate due to their potential implications to social inequalities. Unpaid internships can create barriers to entry for individuals from low-income backgrounds who may not have the financial means to support themselves during the internship period, and this can lead to unequal access to valuable work experience and limit opportunities for those who cannot afford to work without pay. Unpaid internships can also perpetuate exploitation. Unpaid internship can contribute to socioeconomic disparities, as individuals from more privileged backgrounds who can afford to work without pay may have greater access to these opportunities. So I know that a lot has been done in a national level, but also EU level, to tackle this issue of unpaid internships, but I think it is up to us, to young people, to keep lobbying about addressing this major gap in the job market. And also another problem, and I'll be very quick, another problem, I would like also to mention the brain drain phenomena. We see a lot of movement from generally east to west, or east to north, or Western Balkans to west and north. Now, while it's very good that people who come from, let's say, countries that do not offer as good job opportunities as other countries, they have the opportunity to access and to go there and to sort of develop, improve themselves personally and professionally. However, we also have to keep in mind of the gap that is being created. So this calls for a need of national policies, like at the national level. Employment policies and education policies, but also we can come back to that later. And very shortly, I would like to mention the third aspect, which is access to healthcare. And this is a key indicator of social equality as well. And because equal access to healthcare allows young people to lead healthy lives and reach their full potential in their challenging job market. However, I would like to emphasize the need and importance of mental health, especially its accessibility and affordability, which at the moment is a struggle to reach to. This would be my points. Thank you for being a bit long. Sorry.
Thank you so much for those insights. It's such a broad topic, and you've done a really good job of just bringing us onto the same page to begin with. Thank you. We'll come back to a lot of those points, I'm sure. I think a lot of the questions in the audience might touch on the points you've made. You did mention marginalized groups, so that's something I'd like to carry on with. They probably have a different and very specific needs when it comes to social equality and inclusion. Rosario, for the people that you work, what does social equality even mean?
Good morning, everybody. Well, my name is Rosario. I work in Plena Inclusión. Plena Inclusión is an umbrella organization that represents more than 900 Spanish institutions, and our goal, based on our ethical commitment, is to contribute that each person with intellectual and development disabilities and their families can decide and can develop their own project of quality of life. For us, social equality is to let them be the absolute protagonist of their lives. Everybody, regardless of they have or they don't have intellectual disabilities, has the right to live wherever they want, with the people they want, and making their own choices. In our institutions, the most marginalized group among people with disabilities is those with high support needs. Society has traditionally focused on the lack of these persons and on what they cannot do or what they cannot don't, and they haven't been valued as people who can contribute to the society. And we want to change this paradigm. We are moving people with intellectual disabilities from a status of invisibility to a status of social value and contribution. The state must provide them with sufficient tools and support to be able to participate in the community on an equal basis than the rest of the society. Thank you so much.
A really important part of allowing these people to be, as you said, the protagonist of their own lives is the housing issue. So you've been working with an EU-funded housing project which provides normalised housing for people with intellectual disabilities. How does this help us to close the social gap in Europe?
Well, Plena Inclusión has been working for more than 10 years in long-term care with older entities. And in 2018, a study came up of people with high support needs and saw that most of these persons wanted to live at homes rather than in residential homes. This highlighted the large social gap in which these people found themselves. In consequence, in 2019, we created the first version of My House project, and the aim of this project was to accompany people with intellectual disabilities and high support needs to move from living institutions to community living models. From the lessons we learned from this small pilot in 2022, European Union and the Minister of Social Affairs in Spain, thanks to Next Generation funds, have given us the opportunity to carry out a much larger project, more impactful, for 3 years. This gave birth to our project, Mi Casa, Una Vida en Comunidad, which means My House, I Live in the Community. And we want to, it is a national strategy for the transformation of long-term care. The aim of this project is to develop public policies on the institutionalization and prevention of the institutionalization, and also to transform the care model, putting in place innovative solutions for living in housing in the communities, and also to having community bases and tailor-made support services for each person. It's important to be personalized. In short, it's a really great way to create a more inclusive society by reducing the social gap. Thanks.
Thank you. And it'd be great to see, of course, how this is dealt with at the political level. So, Sara, could you perhaps tell us, when it comes to securing equal opportunities, how difficult is it to work at the EU level cooperatively between different EU member states?
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for having me. Maybe to start with, it's so great to see all these young faces in this hemicycle. It's not what I'm used to, and I have to say, this is really how I, many years ago, as a young girl, got into EU politics. So I'm really hoping that maybe some of you, in a couple of years, will be sitting here as well. Well, when it comes to social Europe, I think it's important that we state that this is really what our citizens are expecting. I mean, if you look, for instance, at research like the Eurobarometer, what is highest on the political agenda of EU citizens is actually the cost of living crisis, is growing inequalities, is growing numbers of poverty. However, that unfortunately doesn't mean that it's the kind of push is there on the political level, I have to say. I think for the longest time, social policy has been more of an afterthought in European politics. I mean, we come from a period, of course, where everything was about austerity, even the breakdown of social services, thinking about the care sector as well during the corona crisis, where we really saw what the consequences of that are. So the European project for a long time has been more on internal market, the Eurozone, debt reduction, etc., but never about protecting our citizens, making sure that inequalities are tackled. And in that sense, I think we have a lot of soft law, we have a lot of indicators, but we don't have right now the tools at hand, and a big part of that is due to the fact that member states still say it's our competence. It's not up to Europe to decide. However, I have to say that we have made some steps forward during this term, and that's of course great news. Not that long ago in this hemicycle, we voted for a directive on minimum wages, which is huge. I think a couple of years ago, I would never imagined such a thing to be possible. And that really means that we get to tackle one of the big problems when it comes to eradicating poverty, and that's really the working poor. People that go to work every day and still end up with a bank allowance that doesn't suffice to have a life in dignity, to pay for their bills, to pay for their electricity, to pay for their housing. Another important one, I would say, is tackling the gender pay gap. Yes, there is still a gender pay gap in Europe. Women are still earning less money for the exact same work. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that this is still the case. And fortunately now we have legislation in place that would actually tackle that. And maybe also to mention, it's not done yet, we're still negotiating, but I think the regulation on platform work, for instance, is also hugely important. Maybe some of you have already worked for some of those platforms, or maybe you've ordered, I don't know, a pizza via Deliveroo, or you've ordered a taxi through Uber. I'm sure that you will agree with me that these are actually workers that deserve decent pay, that deserve decent social protection, and that is not the case at all. So these are some examples this term, the last one is still pending, that I hope we can actually get through. But of course there are many others, and maybe we can elaborate on that further, where I think we still need much stronger legislation and more stronger commitments, both from the member states and from the European Union.
Thank you very much. Again, so many points to cover there, but you did actually mention the care sector. That's perhaps one area that might get a little bit neglected sometimes in this conversation. Sabina's actually been doing quite a lot of research into social care. It'd be really interesting to know, how are the needs of the sector changing, and how do young people fit into this?
Well, it's definitely changing. The needs of the sector are changing by the day, I would say, and it's, I think its biggest push was the COVID-19 pandemic, and ever since the sector is quite struggling into finding the balance. But also, the needs of the sector are changing in response to the demographics, societal expectations, and challenges such as aging population and increasing demand for care services. And in that, of course, young people play a significant role in several ways. And first is the workforce. Young people can contribute to the social care sector by entering the workforce as care professionals. As the demand for care services grow all over Europe, I have to say, there is a need for a diverse and skilled workforce to meet these needs. Young individuals can pursue careers, for instance, in caregiving, nursing, social work, and other related fields, bringing energy, fresh perspective, empathy to the sector. However, we've been recently conducting research with social employers in Brussels and the Public Services Union to see the evolving needs of the sector and the new jobs emerging, and what are these skills needed to acquire these new jobs, and how to fill the gap in the market, basically. And actually, the problem is that young people of Europe choose intentionally not to go into working for the care sector because the sector is not attractive. The salaries are very low, they don't amount for decent living, and also the job in itself is stressful. Work-life balance is a big problem that comes with working in the care sector, and therefore young people either don't enter the sector at all, or they just leave the sector for, let's say, the communications sector because it pays 30% more than the care sector pays. So yeah, for instance, recently in our center we do policy reviews and peer reviews on different topics, and the last one was regarding the deinstitutionalization of children and people with disabilities. And we had participants from Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership, and basically the most expressed concern was that young people are leaving the care sector because they don't have labor market support. They do not have money to make a living out of what this sector pays. And what else is changing for the sector except for the workforce? It's the emerge of innovation and technology. Also part of this research was to see what are the skills that young people or workers in general can adapt to meet the needs of the changing sector. And one of the biggest changes is the emerge of technology. And of course, our results showed that it is young people have a tendency to do better work with technology and to adapt these technology than like an older generation, let's put it that way. But since the young people do not enter the sector, now who is going to work on these technologies? So that's also a problem in itself. So yeah, how can young people contribute in this? Developing and implementing these new technologies, digital solutions, and approaches to improve efficiency, effectiveness, and quality of the care services. For instance, there's technology such as telehealth, remote monitoring, and assistive devices that have potential to enhance delivery of the care services and improve the lives of both, actually, caregivers and workers. But we cannot know until we have workers there that actually use these technologies. As I mentioned, the results of our interviews, we conducted interviews from workers' organizations and employers' organizations from 8 EU member states, and also we had EU-level organizations. And all of them basically mentioned that it is the young people who are needed in the sector, basically, because they can move things forward in that regard. And what's coming next? I would say that the sector is changing a lot, but also the need for advocacy and policy development is also changing. So what can you do? Us all together, we can raise awareness about the needs of the social care sector and advocate for policies that promote equality, accessibility, and quality of care. Also, by actively engaging in policy discussions and initiatives, you can also influence the direction of social care policies, ensuring that they address the evolving needs of individuals and communities. It's very important not to forget communities. We cannot focus only on individuals. However, given the aforementioned facts, I talked a lot about wage, salaries, and labor market struggles. I would say that the main need is for more investment in the social care sector in order for the sector to attract young people and to meet your needs. There's a lot of funds coming from social funds. However, I think there is a need for more investment in national level as well. Basically, for young people to earn what they deserve and to live up to the skills that they own. So yeah, that would be it. Thank you.
So you brought up again the pandemic at the beginning of your point there. obviously that had a huge impact on the health and social sectors, but it had a knock-on effect in so many areas of society that perhaps we weren't quite ready for. Rosario, how did it particularly impact the people that you were working with?
Well, in Spain during the COVID pandemic, people who are living in institutions suffer a higher impact than people who live in the community housing. More restrictive rules were adopted for residents than for the rest of the society. And this group has been very vulnerable due to the pandemic, having more nervousness, more problems in their behavior. And even in those cases where those people have already received support, they have lost acquired skills. So the pandemic also has a high impact on the employment of people with disabilities, making their tools for facing the cost of independent living disappear. If the period of lockdown was difficult for society in general, imagine what it's like for people with intellectual disabilities and with comprehension difficulties. The pandemic also has been a great opportunity because it has shown that we have to transform long-term care for people with disabilities. It has been a really wake-up call for society to understand that people have to live in the community. And, well, people in residential homes sadly were dying more than people in the community. So the crisis of COVID was accelerated, a process that our associates movement of Plan Inclusion has been demanding for more than 10 years. The institutionalization process is working on a sensitive and living in the community, which is a required option. The government must start to generate public policies towards the transformation of long-term care.
Sara, do you think it's inevitable that a situation like this occurs, that the most vulnerable people in society are the hardest hit during times of crisis, or is there more that lawmakers can do to protect them?
Well, no, it's not inevitable, of course not. And there's still a lot that we can do because indeed, I mean, a lot of European citizens have been hit by crisis after crisis. And it's especially the most vulnerable, of course, that are hit the hardest. And we've seen that all around Europe, people not being able to pay their electricity bills, their housing, their rent. Not even to feed their families, sometimes not being able to go to work because of the high prices when it comes to their mobility, for instance. And, well, what I expected in such a social crisis was immediate action, and unfortunately that's not what we have seen at all. So in that sense, it's quite sobering to see that for national member states, but also for the Union, it doesn't still sink in that this is actually hugely important that we tackle it. And, well, 2 years ago, we had the Porto Summit where a lot of our leaders said, but we are going to tackle poverty. Honestly, to me, the ambition at that point was not to my likings. I mean, okay, we can get 15 million people out of poverty in 2030, but that still leaves 80 million people in Europe, 80 million, in poverty or at risk of poverty, which is unacceptable, I would say, in a region of the world where, well, there's means at hand to actually tackle that. So it's really a political choice whether to do it or not. And of course, I mean, there are short-term things that need to be done during this cost of living crisis. For us, for instance, as Greens, that's a ban on disconnections to make sure that everyone still has their basic right to energy. This is about taxing, of course, those windfall profits and making sure that that money actually goes to the most vulnerable, and in a structural measure, for instance, making sure that those funds come to those living in energy poverty, to make sure that their houses are insulated, that they have access to renewable energy, etc. Because, of course, that's the cheapest way to tackle that energy crisis. And I mean, what's really crucial to me, and what I've been working on in the Parliament, is a minimum income that is above the poverty threshold for every citizen in Europe in that sense. And it's something that we haven't attained yet. It's still a recommendation. We see that in no of the member states, these minimum income schemes are actually sufficient to have a decent life. And I mean, for me, that is the lever, that is the thing that we need to change. And especially when we look at young people, for instance, I know that in countries like Spain, you are not even eligible to get a minimum income. So you come out of education, if you're lucky, you're looking on the job market, but it's not always so simple to find a decent job, and there is no social safety net to make sure that you don't end up in poverty, especially for those that don't have a family that is supporting them at that point. So for me, that's really key. That's something we need to fight for all together to make sure, well, if we would get a directive on that, if we would get minimum income above the poverty threshold that is accessible, that people can actually use to make a decent life, then you give them the tools at hand to reintegrate into society. Then they don't have to struggle every day for survival, but they actually have time to go and get an education, to go and look for a job. So for me, that's really one of the key things that we need to change, both on the national and the European sphere.
Thank you. So again, plenty of ground covered, and I'm sure you guys have already got plenty of questions for us, so I would love to open up the floor now. I will keep putting your questions in the comments for the online users. We will come to you soon. I'll start here in the room, and I will also be looking up at the galleries. If anyone does have a question, wave enthusiastically. I will ask you to, I will describe who's going to say the question, and then if you could say your number out loud, the one that's on your desk, that would be a great help for the camera people. Okay, so I will start with number 133, please.
Good morning. Hi, thank you so much. My name is Steph. I'm here with the One Campaign. I'm a volunteer. And I wanted to ask a question for Mrs. Matthieu. So when we're talking about setting this minimum pay gap that would be the same for all the European countries, how can we avoid social dumping of companies and jobs that would be externalized onto neighboring countries or other countries around the world? So thus not reinforcing this kind of global north as well and global south extractive relationship, and avoiding that this social gap would be enhanced in other countries around the world once we reach that equality within Europe. Thank you.
Well, what we of course need to do is make sure that not only in Europe people actually get a decent wage. And we do have some pull when it comes to that. And I want to refer to very important legislation that is at hand, the due diligence directive, where the idea is really that it's up to companies, also European companies, to make sure that along the value chain, everything when it comes to environmental but also social conditions is met. And in that sense, it won't be possible anymore to get products on our market that are made with, I don't know, €1 or €2 jobs in that sense. So that you, as a consumer, can be sure if you pick up a t-shirt in one of the shops, that it's made with dignity and that people are actually getting a decent wage. I mean, that's one of the things that I see that we could do coming from the European sphere to make sure that, well, decent wages are not just something we attain for here in Europe, but also in the rest of the world. There are many others, of course, but this is one that I think is quite important and that is at hand right now.
I'd actually ask you to please stand up if you're chosen for a question, just so that the camera can focus in on you. It also helps us to be able to see who's talking. So, number 65, please. If you press the button till the light goes on.
Hola. Buenas, quería hacerle una pregunta a Sara.
I wanted to ask a question to Sara Matthieu. Is it really true? I am an economics student, and is it true that the European Union is helping reduce, control inflation in order to help those who need it most, those who suffer most from inflation? And when we see that there are programs of increasing rates in banking rates that have led the way to this inflation. So is it really the right policies, the European Union is really implementing the right policies in order to help people to really move into inclusion with new programs? Thank you.
So a question for you, Sara.
Yeah, I think it's clear, also what I said before, that the policies that we have right now to make sure that we protect people against things like inflation, they don't suffice. It's very clear. And what also annoys me a lot is that when we're talking, for instance, about what I would think are the solutions, for instance, automatic indexation of minimum wages, of minimum income, to make sure that what you have as an income is actually sufficient to have a decent life and to pay for all the amenities necessary for that, that within a big part of the discourse that is actually seen as feeding inflation, which is not the case at all. I mean, when we're talking about greedflation, for instance, if you look at where the profits of some of this inflation is actually ending up, that's really what we should be focusing on. We should make sure that those excess profits are indeed taxed and go to the most vulnerable, and step out of this narrative where giving people a decent wage and a decent income would feed inflation, because it's absolutely not true.
Okay, right at the back on the back row with a light blue shirt on, I believe. Yep. Can you stand up and tell us which number you have and put your microphone on? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Jakub Blicharski and I come from the Krakow University of Economics. And we've talked about some crises, like the corona crisis, war in Ukraine, the refugee crisis. But I would like to ask about the issue of aging and double aging, which might become a challenge for many European countries, as it will definitely need to rebuild or change some of healthcare system and other services to provide services for elderly people. And my question is there a danger that a social gap might occur as well there? Thank you for your answer.
Is that something perhaps you could speak to, Sabina, the danger of the social gap also existing generationally? Or we can bring in Sara, if you want to start.
I saw you getting ready, so go ahead, and I'll pick it up.
Okay.
Well, here in Plena Inclusión, we work with people with disabilities, but those kind of projects can help also with different sectors of the society. As you know, when people get old, also have reduce their abilities to communicate and also to be involved with the society. We want to create a society who is more accessible and let them all the sectors to be involved. We specifically work with people with disabilities, but these kind of projects can help everyone. So we can be an inclusive society thanks to that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to our older generation, care is indeed hugely important. The Commission has come up with a care strategy, and of course we as a Parliament have taken our position. And for us, it's really about the right to care. So you have an individual right to care decent care, make sure that people in decent conditions can live and are cared for, but also the right to care for someone else. Because, of course, especially when we look at our older generation, a lot of these older people are supported by their families, especially, you know, when their health is deteriorating. And in a lot of member states, you still don't really have the support system needed for people to be able to do that. So that means a certain remuneration, that means being able to take leave from your work to care for these people. And also what's really important is then afterwards the recognition of skills that you obtained when you were caring for this person. So I think these are some of the things, when coming from the Parliament, we have put forward as very important, also when we're talking about long-term care for our elderly constituents.
I would like to pick up on what Ms. Matthieu mentioned, the care for relative in this sense. So with aging population, and since I also want to relate it to what I said previously, that there is not so much workforce as to provide care right now, and since this generation and the upcoming generation are not keen on entering the sector, then it's this big question and gap: who is going to take care of older people? And then it's family care that comes into place, or the concept of care for relatives. However, one of the biggest fears that is rounding right now in the discussions is the gender inequality that this creates. Because with aging people taking care of relatives, it's obviously mostly women. Statistics show that. It's mostly women who take care of their parents, let's say, I don't know, other relatives, but since we're talking about aging, I'm going to keep it as parents as example. And it's also unpaid labor. So this is one of the biggest problems that the aging of population is bringing, except for the services of care, of course. But I also wanted to bring this into attention, the gender equality that this is bringing.
Got a last point on this question, go for it.
Okay, I want to mention also that in Spain is currently working in 20 pilot projects to see how the transformation of long-term care should be. And one of our projects, Mi Casa, is a project that over 3 years we are looking what life should be for people with high support needs. Even the ancients will be in this group. We want to order and to make a change in public policy in these kind of sectors.
Thank you. I'll just take the time to take a question from our online community. We've got quite a few coming in. So first of all, a question for Sara. So this is from Roino Garcia. What measures should the EU take to redistribute wealth and reduce social and economic inequalities between and within countries, guaranteeing a minimum level of social and labour protection for all citizens?
Well, I mean, this is really where European solidarity comes in. Right? And I think when it comes to social policy right now, we don't have enough. And it seems, and I hope I will be wrong, that we are returning to this discourse when it comes to the macroeconomic framework of let's reduce debt, let's make sure we don't overinvest. And I think that's completely the wrong way to go about it. I think on the one hand, it's really necessary that member states are capable of investing in social policy and keep on being capable to do so. And on the other hand, I think if we want to have that European solidarity, if we want to have that upwards social convergence, we also need European funds. And I think for that, we had a great example with our Corona Fund, the RRF, where all of a sudden it was possible for member states to go and loan money together and making sure in that sense that nobody gets into trouble. I think we need to reiterate that. I think we need to have a new fund. It can be a sovereignty fund, or I don't care what it's called, but what we really need is sufficient European money to make sure that we can keep those social investments at the right height. Because if we don't do that, then we can say goodbye to that idea of a social Europe. So for me, that's really key. It's all about the money, making sure that member states, but also Europe, can do huge investments into education, into housing, into upskilling and reskilling, into childcare facilities, etc. And that's really what we need to get closer to bridging the gap and making sure that inequalities within Europe cease to exist.
And we've got one more question talking about the high rate of unemployment among young people in some countries. What can actually be done to tackle this at the European level or the national level? So some suggestions coming in from this person, Maria. Is it about changing temporary contracts, making sure that young people have the opportunity for long-term contracts, for example? This is a question for any panelists, so who would like to speak on unemployment? Yeah, go for it.
Well, there's a lot that can be done, but I would say first, it would be crucial to recognize the skills and the qualification of young people and to give proper contracts that align with those skills. Now, if this is done, if this is a criteria or there's a ceiling put into that, then it's also easier for young people to know where to apply and to know what to expect from it. Now, from the funding, I'm not an expert on that, so I will choose not to speak about it, but of course there's a need for more investment and to increase at least salaries, but the MEP already mentioned the efforts on the minimum income, so starting with that at least. And also, I would really like to re-emphasize the unpaid internship. It is borderline labor exploitation, and it is not fair. It doesn't meet the minimum quality of life for a person to work for free, regardless of what it offers you, regardless of the jump that it gives you to the job market. You should be paid, like you should have a minimum income to amount for your living. No unpaid labor should be allowed, basically.
I'm sure that last point is a point that's close to a lot of people's hearts in here, so straight away I'd like to give the opportunity to Sara to follow up on that. What is being done?
Well, the good news is that next week in this hemicycle we are voting an own initiative report of the Parliament asking exactly that, to ban the unpaid internships. So that's really great. The bad news, however, is that it's just still the position of the Parliament. So then we need to follow up, and we need all of you to campaign and to be present and to put the pressure on the Member States and on the Commission to actually come up with a directive, because that's really what we need to make sure that unpaid internships are gone, are a thing of the past. But maybe to add to that, because of course we're also talking about decent jobs, right? And I think here we have a huge opportunity at hand. You all know about the Green Deal. You all know that we need to have a green transition in our economy. And that is actually an opportunity for many of you, for many young people, because that will create a lot of new jobs. And what I really want to make sure is that all of those new green jobs are quality jobs in decent working conditions, with the trade unions and the workers, making sure they earn decent wages as well. And I think that can really make a huge difference, a huge transformation in our job market. So that's really what I'm working on within the Parliament, to make sure that we use the Green Deal as a real opportunity to create those quality jobs for all of you.
Question from number 44, please. Do stand up and turn your microphone on.
Yeah. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Actually, I have two questions. First question is, what is our role as ladies to decrease this gap that exists between the men and women in the work, because we are all studied in the same university, we are giving same quality, and maybe, let me to say, we have another point of views. And actually, I would like the second question to ask is, we have disabilities in our world, and we need sign language in our societies. Why we don't have curriculum that is giving the sign language as a thing that you have to study, because it's not fair to not be able to talk or not be able to hear, and you are in some city and no one understands you. Yeah? So I think that this is a point that we have to take a look to it. Thank you so much.
Maybe I'll take the first one. First of all, I think closing the gender pay gap is not just the responsibility of women. Let's be very clear on that. This is the responsibility of us all. And I think the framework that we have now within our directive on the gender pay gap can also help to emancipate and to make sure that women actually have the tools at hand to demand to have the same pay for the same job. And that's great. In that sense, it will really help if you go to negotiate, for instance, for a new job, that you will know what is the normal remuneration. Or when you're already in a job, that you can actually check if a colleague is indeed earning more than you or not. So that will really help your negotiating position, I would say. But at the same time, what is really needed is to make sure that also men take up their care work and their part of the care work, because I think if we don't get there, if we don't tackle those inequalities, then we won't get to an equal footing on the job market.
And perhaps the second part of the question might be interesting for Rosario to respond to. So how important is it that the whole of society is included in the process of inclusion, with the example of sign language, but it could be applied to several different areas?
The only way for people with disabilities to be included is to be part of the society. Right now, at least in Spain, most of people who live in residential homes are far from the city. Sometimes they are not inclusive in the same neighborhood than their families. And the only way to be inclusive is to be part with having friends, having inclusive education, and be in the class with the same people like everybody else. So the only way to be part of the society is to be next to each other, is to learn about each other's and to contribute to the society in the same way like everybody else. So that's why we are fighting with a state platform of self-advocates with intellectual disabilities who are fighting for the vindication and conquest of their own rights. So this made it possible to promote legislative changes. For example, in 2019, the right to vote for people with disabilities. In 2020, the elimination of forced sterilization, or even in 2021, there was a civil reform where people with disabilities have the right to take their own decisions. So the only way to be part of this is to listen them and to take actions to help them.
Very quickly, a follow-up from Sabina.
Yeah, very quickly. I would like to build on what Rosario said. It's very true. Like the isolation of people with disabilities, it's mainly the biggest problem why they're having the struggles to integrate in the society. And I just want to emphasize the process of deinstitutionalization. I think that member states should work a bit more on their national level to improve the process of deinstitutionalization, which is basically the change of the care services from institutional base to community based and home care based, which means that if people with disabilities are included in the community or they receive care at home, the people who are going to go there and help them, the friends they're going to see around, the community around them will eventually adapt to their needs more than they would adapt if they were to be in an institutional care base. So that might also be a help, an improvement to the process. Yeah.
I think I've been neglecting this side of the room. So number 310, you've been trying for a while.
My name is Saman Sharma. I'm a 22-year-old European citizen, and I would like to touch upon something that the Member of Parliament said earlier, and it was the idea or the issue of competences. And I think we have started some good stuff in Europe. We are going into the right direction when it comes to the legal dimension of it. We have the Charter for Fundamental Rights. We have the Citizenship Directive, and there has been a very thorough case law of the ICJ. And yeah, yet we should do more and we can do more. And then the question would be, you described the issue of competences. So you described it, but there was no clear proposal. What is the clear proposal that you think there should be long-term and short-term? Long-term, one could talk about a treaty amendment, yes, in the future, but what is the short-term approach to this? What is your proposal? What should the youth do in this area? Thank you.
Well, I think you're right when we're talking about competences, that indeed it would be good to have a treaty change and to make sure that this is much more clear when it comes to the legal base. For sure, this is actually also one of the things that came up during the conference on the future of Europe. So it's clear that this is also something that citizens are really asking of us. That, of course, doesn't mean that we should sit on our butts and wait for a treaty change, because there's still a lot of things we can do also under the current competences. It's just a question of political will. And in that sense, like I said earlier, I think a couple of years ago, none of us would have thought that member states would agree with a directive on minimum wages and collective bargaining. And guess what? We got it. So it's a question of political will, and for me, like I said, the next step is doing the same thing with the minimum incomes. I think there's a legal base for it, but for me, it's really very clear. It's a question of political will, and if it's a question of political will, that means we need to fight for it, and I'm counting on all of you, if you find eradicating poverty in Europe important, to get behind this proposal and to make sure that the Commission and the Member States know that this is also what young people in Europe are demanding.
And we have time for a final question. I think we have one up in the galleries. In the middle up there. Have you got a microphone? Okay, go for it.
Mine is not turned off.
Bear with us for 10 seconds.
Is it working? Okay,
there we go,
hello.
we can hear you.
My name's Aya, and I would like to touch on the question you asked earlier. We were told to apply pressure, we're always told to raise awareness, but what should we actually do, like on paper, to get these measures to come into effect, for these directives to actually be passed, so we can generally achieve what we actually want to achieve beyond raising awareness, beyond always talking about it and letting people know what's going on? Thank you.
That's a great question. It's not just about words. What are the actions that young people can take? Perhaps you can tell us, Sara.
I mean, for me, of course, there are elections coming up. That's hugely important to really make sure that you go to vote and you vote for those people where you think they will help to close that social gap. That's really something you can do that is very concrete. I think for a lot of the subjects that we've been talking about, what you could also do is go very straight towards the Commission, towards national ministers, towards MEPs. There's a lot of petitions, for instance, going around, specifically also, for instance, on the unpaid internships. And I can tell you, if hundreds of young people tag me on social media, send me an email saying that they find this hugely important, well, then it will be more important on my agenda. So in that sense, maybe we also need to think about mobilization more. We've had the climate marches. Maybe it's time that we have social marches as well.
It's not every day that our panelists get the opportunity to talk to a group like you, such a broad group from all across Europe. So I'd love to give them the chance to round off the panel by just speaking directly to you. What's the final message that you would like to give our young audience? We'll start with Sabina.
I'm going to make this a very small motivational speech. I would say that be patient, things take time, and it looks very challenging to achieve what you want to achieve, but also never forget that the power is exactly in your hands. You're the next generation. You're going to be doing things. You're going to be doing the politics of this continent, let's put it that way, but not only. So just inform yourself more, motivate yourself, and I would say work also on the personal development as well, because that, I would say, is the most important, and then come the other ones. But yeah, the power is in your hands. That's my message, basically.
And Rosario?
I would like to share with you something that one person with intellectual disabilities tells us. One of the young women with intellectual disabilities from the board of the directors stood up in one meeting and said, "The life of people with intellectual disabilities is now. Please stop thinking and planning and execute actions now. My life is now." When we talk about people with intellectual disabilities with high support needs to have their lives, it's not a matter of opinion, it's not a matter of fashion, it is a matter of right. We cannot do actions that violate the rights of these people. The way forward has to do with everyone being able to live the life the way they want to live and have all the support that they need. The only way is the institutionalization. It is essential to continue working on these models in order to reduce the social gap faced by people with disabilities and ensure that their rights are guaranteed. Thank you so much.
And Sara.
Yeah, like I said, it gives me a lot of energy seeing so many young people in this room. So you are already doing a great job to get involved, to show your commitment, to get active. And yeah, what I'm really asking all of you is just help us build a union that is truly green, that is truly social, for the sake of us all, because together we can really change the world. It's about your future. Go for it.
Thank you for those great and motivational speeches from all of you. Thank you to you guys in the audience for being here today, especially so early in the morning. Thank you to our online audience for joining us as well. I hope you've enjoyed the panel. You can give us some feedback on the post-session survey. Please do, especially if you enjoyed it. And as I said, don't forget to go to the Ideas Hub just outside the hemicycle or to the youthideas.eu platform where you can carry on exchanging about these topics you've heard or elsewhere in other activities. As I mentioned, I'm a journalist with DW, and the Enter project is the media partner for the I event. You can go and meet my Enter colleagues in the I village. It's well worth it, I promise. They're going to be doing design thinking workshops, but also you can see what kind of content they're going to be creating about the people and the topics of this event. So please do that. The European Parliament building has a limited capacity and everybody wants to get in at some point. So please do go to the I village and enjoy the activities going on there at some point today. And then everybody gets in to see this very spectacular building, which we all want to see. One final point, next year is, of course, the European elections, as we've mentioned, so do go on to together.eu to sign up and support European democracy. Thank you very much from all of us here. Thank you to the panelists, and enjoy the event.
Maybe you want to sing a song? Or you? Non si spegne. Prego, vuoi parlare?